Go. You know, generally I have not been doing stunts here, but, you know. And this used a filter. You know, the water around this table, you know, was Flint water that was filtered. And it just confirms what we know scientifically, which is that if you're using a filter, if you're installing it, then Flint water at this point is drinkable. That does not, I want to repeat, negate the need for us to go ahead and replace some of these pipes, because ultimately you want a system in which you don't have to put a filter on it in order to be assured that it's safe.
I just got back from Flint. Yeah, that Flint. I saw that dirty water with my own eyes. But not to my surprise, Governor Snyder, you're not much of a provider, 'cause Flint ain't fixed. Flint ain't fixed. Flint ain't fixed. Flint ain't fixed. The children up there are sick. The lead in the water is thick. Flint ain't fixed.
But we were being told we're still getting used to the new system. It's safe, it's okay.
But it wasn't okay. Far from it. Flint's tap water was laced with dangerous levels of lead. The state knew about it and did nothing.
The trouble began 2 years ago when the state decided to switch Flint from Detroit's drinking water to a new system. But the new system wouldn't be ready for 2 years. In the meantime, to save money, they switched to the Flint River water.
3, 2, 1.
That first decision turned out to be a mistake, as did nearly every step the state took after it. At the time, the state agency told Flint it didn't have to add an anti-corrosive agent to the water, saying it was not necessary until 2 6-month monitoring periods had been conducted. In other words, they were willing to wait a year to see whether the water was safe. All the while, highly corrosive river water flowed through the city's lead pipes, leaching lead and other dangerous metals into the water supply, and what came out of the tap in many homes was toxic. Almost immediately, residents started complaining. Their water was brown. Some people developed rashes, became sick. Early tests revealed fecal coliform bacteria. So the city and state officials added chlorine to the water supply and told people to boil their water. Both mistakes which can actually increase the level of lead. At city meetings, residents were repeatedly told the water was safe.
We found the worst lead and water contamination that I have seen in 25 years, and believe me, I've seen a lot.
He removed from power the elected mayors and city councils of Detroit, Flint, Pontiac, and Benton Harbor, and installed his cronies to run them in the way that he saw fit. This was a premeditated plan to reduce and privatize public services so that corporate people like him could make more money. Governor Snyder wanted to flex his new autocratic powers. He saw an opportunity to take advantage of the poorest city in the country and of the largest source of fresh water in the world. Option A was that he could just leave well enough alone. After all, for 5 decades, the city of Flint got its water from Lake Huron, a 10,000-year-old pure glacial lake, water delivered to Flint through publicly owned pipelines. Or there was option B. Why not build a new, completely unnecessary pipeline that would benefit investors, his major campaign donors, and banks like Wells Fargo? The only catch was that while the new pipeline was being built, Flint would have to switch over from Lake Huron to the industrial sewage ditch known as the Flint River. In April of 2014, the governor switched the city of Flint's drinking water to the Flint River.
Here's the Flint.
Here's the flag. Here.
Here is his team toasting each other over what would amount to, in essence, a slow-motion ethnic cleansing.
3, 2, 1.
4 to 6 months after the switch was made, actually the local factories noticed more corrosion in their equipment and determined it was from the water and quit using the water. And yet it was another year after that before it became an issue for the population and the homes in the community.
GM reported that it was rusting their pipes, but then we didn't hear any more about it, and it was, well, I asked around, I said, so what about the rest of us? And
for the
it just
governor,
didn't seem like.
there was an even greater tragedy. The Flint River water was corroding the auto parts at the General Motors factory. When the governor heard this, he blew his top. After all, General Motors had donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Republican Governors Association to help elect candidates like Rick Snyder. And here he was, damaging their property. For Governor Snyder, that was a bridge too far. He immediately ordered the water in Flint to be switched back to Lake Huron, but only for the General Motors factory. The people of Flint would continue to drink the poisoned water. Nobody's going to believe this, that the one GM factory that's remaining here in Flint, they got to hook back up to the fresh, clean Lake Huron water, and everybody else.
And we were like, well, what's happening to our bodies? And they were like, they went back to, it's safe as meeting all federal and state guidelines. And that was like the drum.
But the auto parts that had to be washed in the factory had to have the clean, pure water from Lake Huron.
Yeah, because profit reigns supreme.
Some residents are wondering, will we see a change?
No, the average resident won't notice any difference.
Look down in there.
The average residents noticed a difference. A big difference.
That's nasty.
Their hair started to fall out. Skin rashes appeared all over their bodies. And the children got sick. Parents whose children showed no symptoms were still worried that they might be sick. Because as one doctor noticed, nearly every child had ingested lead.
There is no safe level of lead in a body of anybody. There is no safe level of lead. It is potent and it is irreversible, which means once it is in your blood, it wreaks havoc.
You mean irreversible for how long?
Forever. It literally drops IQ levels of children. It leads to impulse disorder and then memory issues, violent behavior, aggressiveness. It also impacts your DNA. Moms exposed to lead, you can see the DNA changes in their grandchildren.
Word of the developing disaster reached the governor's office. And so he quietly dispatched an aide to Flint to find out what exactly was going on. The report came back with bad news. The state investigator recommended switching immediately back to the Lake Huron water. But the governor seemed to have other thoughts.
It's a lot different reading your life in black and white than living it every day. And from reading that, I realized people really didn't know what was going on and that people had a right to protect themselves. And they weren't being told to do it by the city or the state. And so at that point, the only people that were helping us were the ACLU of Michigan. So I had contacted my contact there, Kurt Guyette, and I asked him to help me make this public. I asked him to help me get the word out, and so he did. And so because I released that report, Miguel got into a lot of trouble. He almost lost his job at the EPA. And the EPA then apologized to the city and the state for that being made public because it was an interim report. So we went from huge victory, thinking we finally had somebody on our side, to a huge defeat, saying, okay, now even the federal government's not helping us.
Because, first off, we did have the facts on our side. Being a scientist is also sort of an investigative reporter, because I knew where the bodies had been buried. I knew exactly how they cheated. And so when we did the Freedom of Information Act request, we knew what to ask for, we knew what to look for. You know, and amongst the things we found were the same cheats that had been being used all around the country. So how'd they find that the water was safe? Well, first, they weren't sampling the houses they were supposed to. They were supposed to sample at least 50% of the homes with lead pipe. They weren't sampling even 2 or 3% homes with lead pipe. They were sampling the wrong houses. Secondly, one of the unsung heroes in this was the state themselves. They were so bad, they were good, they were beautiful. I mean, you couldn't pay people to make comments that they made that so quickly galvanized opposition to what they were about, that so clearly showed their arrogance and lack of caring. You know, when you're in a fight of good versus evil, the worst thing you can have is the evil side looks reasonable. They look human. So the best thing you can have, conversely, is the evil side shows their true nature. And they did that. You couldn't ask for better villains.
There have been a lot of accusations about, was this driven by race? Was this driven by the fact that this was a poor city? Is this because they're underserved? There are a lot of accusations out here. This is an internal memo, and before you put it up, I want you to understand who this is going back and forth with. This is Jennifer Crooks, EPA Michigan Program Manager, Region 5. Debbie Baltazar, EPA Region 5 Branch Manager. Timothy Henry, EPA Region 5 Associate Director of the Water Division. Go ahead and put it up. September 24th. Perhaps she already knows all this, but I'm not so sure Flint is the community we want to go out on a limb for. Are you kidding me?
Some questions to Mr. Early. Mr. Early, you wrote a column for the Detroit News in October 2015, is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
You've made clear here today and in your column that the decision to switch over to the Flint River was made by the previous emergency manager and the city council, correct?
That is correct.
In your op-ed, you say, it fell to me to oversee the implementation, correct?
That is correct.
Now, also in your op-ed it says, it did not fall to me to question, second guess, or invalidate the actions taken prior to my appointment. Do you really believe that?
I believe that based on the fact that there was no petition, there was no effort made to engage me to change what had already been implemented.
So I'm sorry, so you believe as an emergency manager, as someone who's put in charge of the city of Flint, it doesn't fall on you to question, second guess, or invalidate any actions taken prior to your appointment?
No, what I mean by that is that it does not fall to me to arbitrarily change that.
Who's responsible for ensuring compliance with state and federal laws regarding safe drinking water?
Well, regarding anything, the emergency manager obviously is the person responsible for making sure that those things get done, and I've always accepted that.
So you take responsibility for that? Because in your op-ed, you say, the headline is, "Don't blame EM for Flint water disaster."
I'm trying to draw a distinction between responsibility and blame, sir.
The director of the Detroit water system sent you a letter offering to reconnect the city of Flint to the Detroit water supply. Why did you reject the director's offer?
I did not do that. I was gone from Flint. I had left Flint by that time that letter came out. That rejection was written by my successor. Again, there were 4 emergency managers during this period. That letter of rejection came from my successor.
Seeing headline after headline about health problems, hair loss, rashes, E. coli, bacteria, sewage, Legionnaire's disease. Did you read any of those stories, Governor Snyder?
Congressman, I read a number of those stories. What I would tell you is those stories, we would follow up on them and continue to get reaffirmation from career bureaucrats that the water was safe. That was wrong.
Do you
That was
admit
not
here
correct
today that
information.
more cases of Legionnaire's disease were reported since the switch to Flint River than, quote, all the cases in the last 5 years or more combined? Do you admit that?
Yes, and that's why I provided a table that shows
you
a number
do.
of these cases were at healthcare facilities. In terms of the numbers, there were 87 cases in
You
the
admit
2-year
here
period.
today that even after the whole world knew that Flint
Congressman,
residents were exposed to unimaginable levels of lead, you did not declare a state of emergency until January 2016. Isn't that true?
I took immediate action. As soon as I learned there was a lead issue, we started issuing filters to people, doing water testing, doing blood testing.
Governor
and to be open
Snyder,
with you, I wish more would have been done.
plausible deniability only works when it's plausible, and I'm not buying that you didn't know about any of this until October 2015. You were not in a medically induced coma for a year. And I've had about enough of your false contrition and your phony apologies. Susan Hedman from the EPA bears not 1/10 of the responsibility of the state of Michigan and your administration, and she resigned, and there you are, dripping with guilt, withdrawing your paycheck, hiring lawyers at the expense of the people, and doing your dead-level best to spread accountability to others and not being accountable. It's not appropriate.
Governor Snyder's administration had primary responsibility for enforcement under the Safe Drinking Water Act, not the EPA. Governor Snyder's administration chose to switch to the Flint River for a source of water, not the EPA. Governor Snyder's administration ignored warnings from the Flint Water Treatment Plant supervisor not to go forward with the switch, not the EPA. Governor Snyder's administration falsely told the city of Flint that corrosion control was unnecessary, not the EPA. Governor Snyder's administration delayed corrosion control for months and harmed thousands of additional people in the process, not the EPA.
If the federal government had a role and the state government had a role and the local government all had a role, the state was the local government during this whole period. The state had an emergency manager that had 100% of authority over all political decisions and all operational functions of the city of Flint. So for the purposes of assigning responsibility, there's no distinction between the city and the state. Who is to blame? I think mainly it's a philosophy of government that frankly this governor brought to the state of Michigan. So while he might not be principally to blame for making the decision, maybe somebody who worked for him did, he is responsible for a philosophy of government that puts dollars and cents, quarterly reports, annual financial statements at the very top of the decision tree. Not the life and health of a community, not equity in our economy, not the things that I think we're actually elected to do. So if I blame anyone in particular, it's the people who supported and elected somebody whose philosophy does not work in the public sector.
Michigan Governor Rick Snyder pleaded not guilty to misdemeanor charges he willfully neglected his duty during the Flint Water Crisis, his lawyer calling it political persecution. 8 other former officials and aides were also charged in connection to the scandal, 2 with involuntary manslaughter.